right, here we go. I gotta finish this one though. Gotta see what this dude was up to. Where was I? Like, all right. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his credulity, perfidy and hatred of men, barbarism and repulsion of science, would Adonai and his priests culminate him? Yes, Lucifer is God. Unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary to light, as to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. In analogical and universal dynamics, one can only lean on that which will resist. Thus, the universe is balanced by two forces within which maintain its equilibrium, the force of attraction and that of repulsion. These two forces exist in physics, philosophy, and religion, and the scientific reality of the divine dualism is demonstrated by the phenomena of polarity and by the universal law of sympathies and antipathies. That is why the intelligent disciples of Zoroaster, as well as, after them, the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and the Templars, have admitted as the only logical metaphysical conception the system of the two divine principles fighting eternally, and one cannot believe the one inferior in power to the other. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophic religion is the belief of Lucifer and the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. One must not lose sight of the fact that Pike occupied simultaneously the positions of Grand Master of the Central Directory of Washington, that of the Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of Charleston, and that of the Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry. In 1880, a charter was granted him by the Royal Order of Scotland for the foundation of lodges in America, appointing him Provincial Grand Master of the Order of HRM. He was indeed a great organizer. Margiotta further writes, the two chief priests, Pike and Mazzini, finally completed the organization of high masonry, establishing the grand central directories for the world, functioning thenceforth to gather information for the benefit of their political policy and the dogmatic propaganda. These were the grand central directories for North America at Washington, for South America at Montevideo, for Europe at Naples, and for Asia and Oceania at Calcutta. Later, a central subdirectory for Africa was founded at Port Louis, Islands of Mauritius, and after the death of Mazzini, the supreme chief constituted a universal sovereign administrative directory at Berlin, which ranked in the hierarchy after the sovereign executive directories and before the four great central directories. Gallatin Mackey, the confidant of Albert Pike, died in Charleston on June 20th, 1881. He was the author of many works on Masonry, namely the Lexicon of Freemasonry, published in New York in 1845, the History of Freemasonry in South Carolina, the Manual of the Lodge, the Masonic Ritualist, the Symbolism of Freemasonry, and the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the authorship of which is generally now attributed to Albert George Mackey. According to the fundamental constitution of the Paladin, the nomination of the chief of political action, the president of the sovereign executive directory, was not an elective office. Its incumbent was an appointee of the sovereign pontiff of universal Freemasonry. When Mazzini felt himself to be dying, he designated Andrea Lemmy as his successor. He died on March 11th, 1872 at Pisa, and Albert Pike, deferring to his wishes, named Adriano Lemmy as his successor. Pike was not only an organizer and a politician, he was also, in his religious capacity, a Kabbalist and spiritualist, a mystic on whose personality the following antidote sheds a flood of light. Speaking before the Supreme Council of Charleston on October 20th, 1884, he gave an account of his recent travels through the United States and some incidental experiences. One of these he described as follows. At St. Louis, we operated the grand rites, and through Sister Ingersoll, who is a first-class medium, received astonishing revelations during a Psalm Paladin session at which I presided, assisted by Brother Friedman and Sister Warnburn. Without putting Sister Ingersoll to sleep, we saturated her with the spirit of Ariel himself, but Ariel took possession of her with 329 more spirits of fire, and the seance from then on was marvelous. Sister Ingersoll lifted into space, floated over the assembly, and her garments were suddenly devoured by a flame which enfolded without burning her. We saw her thus in a state of nudity for over 10 minutes, flitting above our heads as though borne by an invisible cloud or upheld by a beneficent spirit. She answered all questions put to her. We thus soon had the latest news of our very illustrious brother, Andrea Lemmy. Then Astaroth in person revealed himself, flying beside her medium and holding her hand. He breathed upon her and her clothes, returning from nowhere, clothed her again. Finally, Astaroth vanished, and her sister fell gently onto a chair where, with her head down back, she gave up Ariel and the 329 spirits who had accompanied her. We counted 330 exaltations in all at the end of this most successful experiment. The number of books of this period refer to what must have been a wireless telephone in the possession of the heads of the Masonic organization. A translation of the detailed description of this instrument given in Barthel's book is quoted herewith as being of interest in these days when magic sometimes becomes experimental science. At the date on which this description was first printed, 1894, wireless was unknown. In his house, Gallatin Mackey once showed me that Arcula Mystica, the mystic box, of which there are only 7 examples in existence at Charleston, Bourne, Berlin, Washington, Montevideo, Naples, and Calcutta. The exterior of the small box resembles a liquor's receptacle. A spring catch opens simultaneously its 2 doors and lid. Inside, in the middle, stands a telephone mouthpiece in silver, which at first sight one would take for a very small trumpet or hunting horn. At the left is a little rope made of twisted silver threads, one end of which is attached to the machine, while other extremity ends in a kind of little bell which one holds to one's ear to hear the voice of the person with whom one is speaking, just like the telephone of today. At the right is a toad in silver with its mouth open. Placed around the opening of the mouthpiece stand 7 statuettes in gold, each one a small separate silver pedestal representing symbolically the 7 cardinal virtues of the Paladin ladder. Each of these 7 statuettes designates one of the directories. The statuettes Ignis, Sacred Fire, Divine Endeavor stands for the Supreme Dogmatic Directory of Charleston. Ratio, Reason, Triumphant over Superstition. The Sovereign Executive Directory of Rome. Labor, the Sovereign Administrative Directory of Berlin. Uberus, Fecundity, Caritas, Masonic Charity. Emancipatio, the emancipation of humanity, shedding the yoke of all despotisms, and Felicitas, happiness derived from virtuous practices, representing the 4 grand central directories of Washington, Naples, Montevideo, and Calcutta. When the supreme dogmatical chief wishes to communicate, for example, with the head of a political action, he presses his finger on the statuette Ignis and on the statue Ratio. These sink into their sockets, and at the same instant, a strong whistling is heard in Rome. In the office where Lemmy keeps his Arcula Mystica, Lemmy opens his box and sees the statuette of Ignis sunk, while tiny, harmless flames issue from the throat of the silver toad. Then he knows that the Sovereign Pontiff of Charleston wishes to speak to him. He presses down the statuette of Ratio in his box, and from then on, the conversation between the 2 chiefs proceeds, each one speaking directly into the mouthpiece described above, while at the same time holding to his ear the small silver bell. At the end of the conversation, each chief replaces the golden statuettes by pulling them up by the head. Every Sovereign Grand Master of a directory travels with his Arcula Mystica. The box is personally confided to him. Wow. That of the Administrative Directory of Berlin is kept by the Sovereign Finance Delegate, who is actually Blechroder, 1893. It is evidently necessary to detach the memory of Albert Pike from the great number of exaggerated legends which cling to his name, but with a man of this type, one never knows just what to think. His reputation as an occultist had overstepped the doors of the lodges and inner shrines. Everyone knew from heresy that he gave himself up to Luciferian practices. Wow, owing to the discredit cast upon Batilla's writings, we now know the corroboration of the existence of such rites as described above from the well-known Theosophist Mrs. Alice A. Bailey's book, Initium Human and Solar, published 1922 by the Lucifer Publishing Company, New York City, which has never been challenged. Such quotations touch upon the following subjects: description of the deity, description of initiation of fire, description of sex and fire, description of the seven rays. Whoo! Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm going to be able to read for probably another 5 minutes, but this is, wow. I don't know what to say. Interesting. It's just interesting. I don't know how to even explain it. I'll continue on, but man, it's just interesting. I don't know how to put it. I don't know if it's good or bad or what, but yeah, it's deep. I'll give you that much. 1. The Lord of the world, the one initiator, he who is called in the Bible the Ancient of Days and in the Hindu scriptures the first Kamara, he, Sanat Kamara, it is, from his throne in Shambhala in the Gobi Desert, presides over the Lodge of Masters and holds in his hands the reins of government in all the 3 departments, called in some scriptures the Great Sacrifice. He is chosen to watch over the evolution of men and devas until all have been occultly saved. He is who 4 times a year meets in conference with the Kahons and Masters and authorizes what shall be done to further the ends of evolution. Call it Lucifer, call it Satan, or the devil. It is always the same old manifestation, revamped now as Sanat Kamara, and while he may indeed seem to be a very good god, his presence alone is our only concern at the moment. 2. As to the initiation, the Hierophant utters the word, and the force is literally thrown into the initiate's bodies and centuries, passing down through the centuries on the mental plane via the astral centers to the centers of the etheric levels, which finally absorb it. This is the stupendous moment for the initiate and brings to him a realization of the literal absolute truth of the phrase that God is a consuming fire. He knows past all gainsaying that fire energy is electric force constitute the sum total of all that is. He is literally bathed in the fires of purification. He sees fire on all sides pouring out through the rod of initiation, circulating around the triangle and passing through the bodies of the 2 sponsoring adepts. For a brief second, the entire lodge of masters and initiates, standing in their ceremonial places without the triangle, are hidden from view by a wall of fire. The initiate sees no one save the Hierophant and is aware of nothing but a fiery blaze of pure blue-white flame which burns but destroys not, which intensifies the activity of every atom in his body without disintegrating, and which purifies his entire nature. Yikes, the fire tries his work of what sort it is, and he passes through the flame. At the 5th initiation, the great secret which concerns the fire or spirit aspect is revealed to the wondering and amazed master. He realizes, in a sense of incomprehensible to the man, the fact that all is fire and fire is all. Damn, dude. Let the disciple transfer the fire from the lower triangle to the higher and preserve that which is created through the fire of the midway point. This means literally the control by the initiate of the sex impulse is usually understood, and the transference of the fire, which now normally vitalizes generative organs, to the throat center, thus leading to creation upon the mental plane through the agency of mind. Okay. 4. As to the 7 rays, grouped of egos are formed according to the ray, 2, according to their subray, 3, according to their rate of vibration. They are also grouped for purposes of classification. 1 as egos according to their egoic ray, 2 as personalities according to the subray, which is governing the personality. All are graded and charted. The masters have their halls of records with a system of tabulation incomprehensible to us owing to its magnitude and its necessary intricacies wherein these charts are kept. They are under the care of Cohen of a ray, each ray having its own collection of charts. These halls of records are mostly on the lowest levels of the mental plane and the highest of the astral, as they can be there most fully utilized and are most easily accessible. While the ray business may be an excellent scientific, though little known method of keeping in touch with the adepts, it has one very serious disadvantage, namely that whoever is attuned to a ray is, in case of revenge or evil intent on the part of a superior, shall we say scientist, vulnerable on this ray. One is almost astonished at the frankness displayed by Mr. Bailey in her revelations concerning the secrets of initiation. When one remembers the tragic fate of William Morgan, the secret condemnation, kidnapping, and sequester, and torture and final assassination of this New York journalist who had published for the profane public the principal Masonic rituals of the period. Carlyle, in his Manual of Freemasonry, gives following particulars. My exposure of Freemasonry in 1825 led to the exposure in the United States of America, and a Mason there of the name William Morgan, having announced his intention of assisting in the work of exposure, was kidnapped under pretending forms and warrants of law by his brother Masons, removed from the state of New York to the borders of Canada near the Falls of Niagara, and there most barbarously murdered. This happened in 1826. The states have been for many years much excited upon the subject. A regular warfare has arisen between Masons and anti-Masons. Societies of anti-Masons have been formed, newspapers and magazines started, many pamphlets and volumes, with much correspondence published, so that before the slavery question was passed amongst them, all parties had merged themselves into Masons and anti-Masons. Several persons were punished for the abduction of Morgan, but the murderers were sheltered by Masonic lodges and rescued from justice. The story of the murder of William Morgan for the crime of violating Masonic secrecy has long been a well-known historical fact, but in August 1875, the full particulars were brought to light by the publication of two letters from the Venerable Thurlow Weed. The facts were as follows. How much time I got? I'll go another page. In the year 1826, Morgan, who had passed through all the degrees of Freemasonry and held a very high position in the order, conceived the idea of publishing a book disclosing all the secrets of the sect. What his motive may have been is only conjectural. Mr. Weed was living at that time in the town of Rochester, New York, and Morgan requested him to publish the projected book. Mr. Weed declined, and Morgan went to the adjoining town of Botvia, where he arranged with another person for the publication. He had written a portion of the book and was engaged in completing it when he was arrested on the false charge of larceny. On the 10th of September, conveyed to the jail on Ontario County. Ontario County. The sheriff and officers of this person were Masons. His house was searched and his manuscripts were seized and destroyed. On the evening of the 12th September, he was discharged by the interference of some of the conspirators, and as he passed out of the door of the jail, was seized by them, taken a short distance, and then forcibly put into a carriage. He was carried in the course of that night on to the road ridge about 2 miles beyond the village of Rochester. During the next day, he was taken to Lewiston, a distance of 70 or 80 miles, and from thence to Fort Nigeria at the mouth of the Nigerian River. His benevolent captors had decided on bringing him here in the hope that their brother Masons of Canada would aid them in disposing of him. His murder was not then contemplated, but it was hoped that the Canadian Masons would take charge of him and send him to end his days among the Indian tribes in the northwest of Canada. Placing their prisoner in Fort Niagara, his captors crossed the river into Canada to attend a meeting of a lodge there, but the Canadian Masons, after much deliberation, refused to become parties to the business. The American Masons returned to Fort Niagara, and in a few days afterwards, a large number of men high in the order assembled a short distance off to open an encampment of Knights Templars. The additional power of the sealed obligation being necessary for such a case. At night they dined together, and after dinner the chaplain gave a sentiment too significant that all thoughts were turned towards Fort Niagara. Niagara. The sentiment was, in fact, death to all traitors, and immediately afterwards, one of the company, Colonel King, arose from the table and called 4 of the others to accompany him. These were Whitney, a stonesman, Kubak, a farmer, Gershad, a butcher, and Howard, a bookbinder. They were all, says Mr. Weed, men of correct habits and good character, and all, I doubt not, were moved by the enthusiastic but most misguided sense of duty. King told them that he had an order from the Grand Master, the execution of which required their assistance, and they replied that they would obey it. The 5 murderers were then driven in a carriage to the fort where Morgan was confined. It was just midnight. They told the doomed man that his friends had completed their arrangements for his removal to Canada, where his life would be safe. He consented to go with them, and they walked to the wharf where a boat was waiting for them. They embarked and rowed away into the darkness. When the boat reached the point where Niagara River empties itself into the Lake Ontario, the murderers threw off all pretense and, with some horrible mummeries, ordered Morgan to prepare for death. They wound a rope around him, attaching to each end of it a heavy weight, and threw him overboard. He sank like a stone, and the murderers returned to tell their comrades that the traitor had met a traitor's doom. One of the murderers, Whitney, told all these particulars to Mr. Weed a few months afterwards, but it is only now, when all the criminals are dead, that he makes the fact public. The body of Morgan was found a year afterwards, identified by his wife and friends, and buried, and although the Masons tried to dispute the identification, their efforts were futile. None of the murderers were ever brought to justice. So much for the oath of secrecy and brotherhood. Nowadays, greater precautions are observed in getting rid of the enemies of the sect. Some little study and the cooperation of a few culpable doctors, its auxiliaries, and affiliates enable the terrible sect to dispose easily of their enemies. The victim of their vengeance, swallowing some disease germ, meets a fate that none can prove to have been artificially contrived. This is the secret of secrets, denied again and again, and yet the charge remains, for plague, cholera, and all epidemics can be let loose on the world at a word from the hidden masters. Oh! Guess they're not fucking around. But to return to the organization of Freemasonry. It is necessary here to say that in many instances where a masculine lodge has a feminine annex, its existence is frequently completely ignored by the majority of the brothers. No mutual visiting is allowed among the female members of the lower Masonic degrees, for a sister may enter lodges other than her own only after she has herself attained the 5th degree, as well as masculine general inspectors on permanent missions. In direct communication with Charleston, there are general inspectresses, high-grade women Masons belonging to the ordinary Masonry, who, while not necessarily affiliated with Palladism, serve the purpose of its leaders, their good offices being much appreciated when they furnish useful information to headquarters. These women are privileged to enter the lodges and inner shrines of Masonry only, but are not admitted to Paladin triangles. As for men belonging to an adoptive lodge where brothers and sisters work together, they must have at least attained the 32nd Prince of the Royal Secret or a corresponding grade in another rot before they can enter an Areopagus of sublime ecosace. I'm going to go one more because that'll end a quote. As regards the position of women in Masonry, we think that this cannot be better explained than in the words of Albert Pike himself in La Femme Elephant dans la Frankenmacaroninerie Universelle, page 578, A.C. Delarive states that on July 14, 1889, Albert Pike, Sovereign Pontiff of the Universal Freemasonry, addressed to the 23rd Supreme Confederate Councils of the world the following instructions, which we quote here with in part. Well, for anyone who wants to know that little nugget, you're going to have to wait, because I got shit to do. It is my Christmas. I'll see you all later.